Good afternoon and welcome to The Road to Recovery, The Road to Freedom with Mark. This is my 28-minute slot every Friday, and Friday has rolled around again, so it's good to be here. Welcome to everyone from the beautiful Wairarapa and the equally beautiful Hawke's Bay. It's good to have you on board. Nice to have all the support too. Thank you very much to all of the sponsors who make the show and the station possible. To Wairarapa TV, thanks for coming on board. It's nice to be able to do this sort of thing and to have a voice. My show is about mental health and particularly about suffering from mental disorders, not just depression. There's a lot of different types of mental disorders that can afflict people, and it's more than possible to suffer from more than one affliction. For example, things like OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. I hate people who just speak in abbreviations, because the whole point of speaking is to communicate, and if no one knows what the hell you're talking about because you use abbreviations, then the point of you communicating has been completely lost. So, please don't do things like that. It's really very annoying when you talk about in-words and abbreviations that are not explained. You just lose people, so it's a nonsense. So that's one thing, obsessive compulsive disorder, and often it's very difficult to diagnose problems, and it's especially difficult to realise problems that you may have because you don't know what the signs are, what's going on, and you think that what's happening to you is what happens to everybody, that's normal. Now, obsessive compulsive disorder can start with little things like funny little things like wiping light switches, being absolutely paranoid about dirt, about being furious, and about cleaning things all the time. It often comes out that way, and that's sort of the beginning of it. And having everything straight and exact and in its perfect place, and you cannot stand something to be slightly out. For example, paintings. It drives me absolutely nuts when I see paintings that are askew. It's another sign of obsessive compulsive disorder, is you cannot leave it there. It has to be straightened. It has to be done. And this is the compulsion. This is what the compulsiveness is. It's a driving to have to do something, and you feel so uncomfortable if you don't. It drives you nuts. You might go upstairs to bed and think about something that's not straight on the table. Get out of bed, go downstairs and straighten it up. You definitely got obsessive compulsive disorder, my friend. You definitely have. And it can get out of control. It can get to the point where you do certain things in a certain pattern every time. You start counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Things like that, repetition. It's often to do with repetition, and what's happening there, what you're living out, is a frustration inside. So there is a problem in your head, and it is coming out this way. The obsessive compulsive behaviour is a result of the mental disorder, the frustration, something that you're trying to sort out in your head, and you don't have control of it. So in order to exercise or to gain control, it plays out in some kind of obsessive behaviour where you feel like you have some degree of control about what's in front of you, rather than being able to conquer the issue that's in your head. So these are the sort of things that you need to talk about, and not so much with friends, because they might not always have the answers, but sometimes it's very important to talk to the appropriate people. Now, the doorway is your doctor. Say to him or her, look, this is what's happening with me, and it's getting worse, and I'm worried about it. And they can assess you at that point, and they're used to these sort of things. They hear it all the time. So they can decide at that point whether it's really serious and needs addressing now, in which case they can send you on to the appropriate people to help you with these problems. Or they can make suggestions where you can turn a corner rather easily and quickly before it gets too bad. because these things, it's kind of like a wave. Sometimes it'll get better, sometimes it'll get worse. Sometimes it just gets worse and worse and worse until it completely overwhelms you and swamps you. So it's not the same for everybody. No mental illness is the same for everybody. It is an individual experience every bit as much as you are an individual. So what you feel and what you're going through, there are some commonalities, but the entire experience is always unique to the individual. And, being aware of it is more than halfway there. Once you're aware of what's going on, then you can address it. It's when things like that creep up on you and you just take it for granted, that's when things can really start snowballing. So leaving things, sometimes it solves issues, but most of the time it doesn't. And you feel much better. You feel a relief, a weight off your shoulders if you do express what's going on. And it's not just with obsessive compulsive disorder. Some people have attention deficit disorder. They can't concentrate on anything for any length of time, so they're unable to get things done. They can only do short bursts. There's all kinds of different issues, and every unique experience and every type of disorder is quite unique in its own right, and it doesn't necessarily have obvious parameters. It can be a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So talking to a doctor is very important. Good drugs can be good. Don't necessarily do everything, because sometimes you get side effects, and sometimes the cure can be as bad as the problem. I have had those experiences. Sleep is one of the most important things when you're suffering from depression, and a lot of the time I try and knock coffee off by about 2 PM if I can. Simple things like that. Caffeine can really play with you, and if you're not sleeping right, it exacerbates other mental disorders. It makes it more difficult for you because you can't concentrate, you're tired, you're sick, you just want to go to bed, you just want sleep, and it drives you nuts. So one of the most important thing when you're suffering from mental illness is to do whatever you can to try and get regular sleep. And any exercise, a walk on the street is good, but preferably if you can get out, even when it's wet. And I know that's difficult. I really struggle with it myself. But I've got into walking along rivers and sitting on riverbanks and just watching birds and stuff. And that kind of peacefulness, just allowing yourself, your spirit, your heart, your head to empty of your problems and just try and be in the moment and enjoy that special, unique time of peace, can do an enormous amount to get you going in the right direction and help you. Right, well, time's cracking on, and this isn't just about talking about mental health. This is talking also about my many adventures that I had all around the world. I travelled for many, many years, Africa, Southeast Asia, Europe. I lived in London for 5 years, and I had a wild time. I decided to have an adventure rather than have money, so I sacrificed an enormous amount. I sacrificed a cushy life for a life of struggle and drug addiction and mental disorder, but I also had an amazing, wild, wonderful time, and I met so many absolutely incredible people all over the world. And the funny thing is, I still remember a chap I met in the middle of the Kalahari Desert. I often think of him as the happiest man in the world, and he lived with his family in a dry riverbank. No house, no food, no money, no nothing, and yet they were the happiest people that I've ever met in my life. And it's amazing, what you can find if you look. So this is a story about one of my many adventures. This is when I was out in Turkey. And this one's called Gallipoli in Istanbul. My good friend Wayne and I had hitchhiked our way around the Aegean coast from Greece to Turkey. We first headed down to the small town of Çanakkale, which is near the beach we refer to as Gallipoli. We met up with a guy called David, who ran his home as a hostel for travellers, especially Kiwis and Aussies. David was a fantastic host and arranged a cheap taxi trip over the hill to where the great battle for Chunukbair occurred. Wayne and I did not know what to expect, so we were amazed to find the place left pretty much unchanged from those terrible days when so many young men had perished. There was a small museum, temporarily manned by an old geezer, some well-tended graves at the top of the hill, and a large stone plaque from the term of President Ataturk. In the most respectful terms, it is written there for all to see. Those heroes that shed their blood and lost their lives, you are now lying in the soil of a friendly country, therefore rest in peace. There is no difference between the Johnnies and the mermaids to us where they lay side by side, here in this country of ours. You, the mothers, who sent their sons from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are in peace. After having lost their lives on this land, they have become our sons as well. Ataturk, 1934. Apart from this plaque, the graves and museum, very little had changed from those terrible days when the abortive landings had taken place. Down on the beach there were thousands of corroded shell casings and bullets lying everywhere. Many of these have been taken as souvenirs by tourists and are quickly disappearing as a result. Up from the beach there was an area called the Pines, where many Australian boys had been slaughtered by both friendly fire and the fierce resistance the Turks had showed. At the time, a simple unsealed road led up to the hills of Chunukbair, where the Indians and Kiwis had been decimated. There were open trenches all over the place. Undisturbed from the time those poor boys had fallen, the trenches were full of skull, leg and arm bones protruding from the earth. As the land grew steeper, the number of bones increased, and tears flowed freely as I touched them gently. Despite the incredibly steep and exposed terrain, the Kiwis managed to force the Turks off the top, were forced back, then took it a second time, only to be hurled off before truce being declared. I did not believe in ghosts until that day, but the eerie emptiness of this open graveyard moved me as I had never been before. After spending the best part of a day at Gallipoli, we headed back to Conakry, where through David I met up with one of the last Turkish survivors of the campaign. He heaped praise on his old enemy for their fierceness and tenacity, especially the Kiwis. He told me of the extreme hardships they all had to endure, freezing winter and blistering summer, and trenches so close they could hear each other talking. It was quite overwhelming to hear of his hardships, and humbling to hear the great respect he held for his old enemy. After a very pleasant and moving stay at Conakry, we headed back up the peninsula and eastwards on to Istanbul. This magnificent city on the Golden Horn is split in half by the Bosphorus Strait. On one side lies the new part of the city, with its high rises and western trappings like McDonald's. Fittingly enough, it is on the western bank and emphasises Turkey's wish to join the European Union. The eastern bank, however, is the Byzantium and Constantinople of old. It still retains some of the old Topkapi Palace walls from the Ottoman Empire. Also the magnificent St. Sophia Byzantium period church. Erected at the height of the Byzantium period, it boasted the largest dome of any church for over 1,000 years. Below St. Sophia's, towards the banks, the dilapidated old buildings lean on each other like drunks. We stayed on the rooftop of one of these dodgy old places directly below the Blue Mosque, which sits in magnificence further up the hill. I walked up from our dodgy lodgings to St. Sophia's and spent a few hours in its pleasant cool on a blistering hot day. From there I walked on to the quadrant outside the incredible Blue Mosque with its 6 gigantic minarets. Its overall size is hard to take in. Entering the Blue Mosque, having first washed hands and feet in the cool water and covering from wrist to ankle, is a religious experience in itself. The eye is drawn to the heavens by the untold thousands of beautiful handmade turquoise tiles, the bright light of God, their epicentre. It was impossible to take it all in one glance. I found myself bowing my head naturally in order to take in the magnificence of this labour of love. The sheer scale only added to the potency of its message. The peace and serenity of this cool sanctuary was most welcome on a hot afternoon. Outside the quadrant, which houses one of the 4 Cleopatra's Needles taken from Egypt during the height of empire, the others are located on the Champs-Élysées in Paris, the Embankment on the Thames in London, and the Washington Monument in the United States. Strange how the symbols of power are reused by the next great power. These so-called needles are huge obelisks of stone, tapering from bottom to top and finished at a point. Beautiful and huge in their own right, they are symbols of ancient power which are enhanced by their new surroundings, especially in Istanbul. At night there was a sound and light show outside the Blue Mosque which lit it up like a castle from ancient times. This spectacular show transported the crowd back in time to when great sultans ruled over this magnificent city and brought light and civilization into an otherwise dark world. The mighty Ottoman Empire slowly ground to a halt, finally collapsing in the 1920s. After the show, I headed back to our accommodation and got off to sleep with the help of a local hooch called Raki. At first light, the morning calling to prayer broke out across the old city via speakers on the minarets of the mosques. Haunting and beautiful, it is an experience that stays with you for a lifetime. In the cool air and beautiful light of the morning, I walked up the hill to the Topkapi Museum. Housed in the ruins of the old castle, it houses many priceless works of art and precious gems. Amongst these is the Topkapi diamond, a huge, beautiful stone that defies belief. Not as large as the Cullinan diamond used in the British crown jewels, it nonetheless has an otherworldly clarity to it. It refracts the light so well it almost seems liquid. Also housed there are emeralds the size of dinner plates. Just a tiny fraction of the Sultan's treasures remain. Yet what remains is such a beautiful and impressive collection that only sparks the imagination. There is also a collection of Ming Dynasty pottery so huge the senses begin to blur on looking at it. Reminiscent of the tales of the Arabian Nights, I could easily imagine a great castle on the hill full of great piles of treasure. By the very nature of the development of the city, it is impossible to rebuild what has fallen into disrepair. The ruins, however, only enhance the beauty and mystique of the old city. I left Topkapi Palace in the heat of the afternoon and headed down a street called Divan seeking shade. I came across a smoking cafe where the locals in their traditional loose clothes sat to while away a hot afternoon. The idea of this cafe was that you purchase a huge stub of tobacco for 100 or so lira. You then are waited upon by waiters who carry around hot coals on a plate. These are placed on the stub and put in a huge water pipe. These beautiful hookah pipes, as they are called, have a number of hoses and mouthpieces from them, so the experience can be shared amongst friends. They also serve hot sweet tea called simply chai. It comes with no milk, instead they serve water with the tea. The cafe itself is an open courtyard protected from the sun by high walls. The tables, chairs and floors are solid granite and it is refreshingly cool. Old men sit around with friends, chatting and puffing on their pipes. As I watch them, I am transcended in time and imagine the same scene having played itself out for centuries. Even sitting on my own, smoking and watching, was an extremely pleasant way to spend an afternoon. Despite the language barrier, I felt quite accepted. The combination of tea and good tobacco was quite intoxicating. I waited until the burning sun had stooped quite low before wandering down some narrow cobblestone streets. Old men sat on stools at short tables, drinking tea and playing backgammon. Since I had already played the game quite often, I asked an old guy for a game. The language barrier can be overcome with hand signals and a few words. Before long, I was being thrashed, but I stuck with it until I could hold my own at the breakneck speed. Backgammon is like a national pastime for men, and we played many enjoyable games, some of which I won. We played well into dark that night, and I felt like I had travelled in time, as this time-honoured tradition played itself out. With my first real lesson in backgammon, I headed back down the hill to my rooftop bed. It was only possible to sleep during the small hours. Over the next few days, Wayne and I moved to cheaper accommodation, which required a cheap bus ride just out from the old city centre. We visited other great mosques like Suleiman the Magnificent's around the Golden Horn. We also went to local markets with their exotic food and spices. The Turks are natural salesmen and always drive a hard bargain. Centuries of trading on the Silk Route seems to have honed their skills, making trading with them great fun. Despite obvious poverty, the city vibrantly bustles with trade. Handmade carpets are a favourite item with the Turks, and they go to great lengths to sell these works of art. The hot summer days of visiting mosques and markets, of smoking hookah pipes and nights of backgammon passed too quickly. Soon we were off south, down the coast, but the indelible impression of Istanbul stayed with us for the rest of our lives. The end. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story. It certainly brought back some great memories for me. Some sad memories. You know, Gallipoli is one of those places, you know, that is a really, really weird place to visit. There are a few graveyards, if you want to call them like that, a few places in the world that just have this weird, eerie, spooky significance, and sometimes that experience is great, like, for example, Highgate Cemetery in London, where all kinds of famous people, Karl Marx, Keats, Yeats, rich and famous people were buried, and it's so beautiful that in Victorian times they used to picnic there in the cemetery. It is a really, really beautiful place, and you know, Jim Morrison's grave in Paris, it's a very dilapidated, graffitied lump of rock, but, you know, nonetheless, an amazing place. And there's quite a few places like that around the world, some very spooky places I've been to, but yeah, Gallipoli definitely was one of those most amazing places, and it's been done up, completely changed now. There's a new road being put in, some of the trenches have been closed, the pine trees have been decked, a lot of the bullets are gone off the beaches and that. So the experience now is very, very different from the experience I had some 35 years ago. It has changed enormously, and I'm very glad I got to see it when I did before it became a bit of a circus, which it unfortunately has become. As things become popular, they tend to become quite tainted and watered down for the consumption of the general public, which is a real shame, a terrible shame. Sometimes places are simply better left as they are. It's a more appropriate and respectful thing to do, but unfortunately the world just isn't like that. We seem to have to always improve things. Well, it's just about my show for the day. I've only got a few more minutes left to talk. I'm going to go out this afternoon to Mount Holdsworth just to check it out. I haven't been there for a long, long time, and I know what a beautiful place it is. And I would encourage anyone and everyone in the Wairarapa, and if you're visiting, to pop out there and have a look and make use of some of these most beautiful places that we have out here. You know, the Wairarapa's got all kinds of amazing places, and it's very important that you get out there and do these things and support your community. Go out and see local bands, and remember that, you know, money spent in your community helps everyone around you. Money spent overseas is profits gone. So, you know, it's about supporting your community in every way, getting involved in workshops and, you know, learning things and helping people in your community really makes an enormous change, not just in the lives of others, but your life too. It makes it so much better when you get involved and feel like you're doing your bit. And that's why I'm so very appreciative of the opportunity that Wairarapa TV and our Era Radio have given me to do this show. Most of the time, minorities like myself are never heard or seen. We have to suffer in silence. But thanks to the work of people like Veronica and Michael here at Era Radio, you know, people like me have an opportunity to have a say and provide you with an alternative perspective. And that's a very, very healthy thing to have in society. And it's good that our society is beginning to understand that everybody matters and everybody counts, and that we really do need to look after each other. So that's my message for the week, and my time is done. Thank you very much for tuning in. There is a website that you can go and visit, www.arrow. Get in there. There's podcasts, which are the three, as I understand it, 3 previous recorded shows of all of the sponsored shows, and me, who, by the way, is unsponsored. So if you know of anyone who wants to contribute financially, sponsor a show, maybe even come and do a show themselves, get in touch with Michael or Veronica here at Arrow Radio, and they'll be really, really grateful if you would come on board and do your little bit for your community, because that's what really counts at the end of the day, is the place that you live and the people that live in it. They are the really important things in life. So, you know, look after them and do your bit, and that will be very much appreciated by one and all. I hope you have a good week. I'll be back next week. We'll be closed on the 27th. I won't be doing anything. Obviously, 2 days after Christmas, we'll be gone. And may disappear from the year next year for a little while, but I'll keep doing the good thing, and I'll see you again next week. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. Tell your friends. Continue to enjoy it, and I'll try and write some more good stories for you. Thanks, and bye for now.